Hello, everybody. This is Anthony for Investors Underground. Today, I have the opportunity to get to speak with the one and only Ann Curtin, who you may also know as the Wall Street Coach. For nearly 25 years, Kim worked on Wall Street, helping founders, CEOs, and senior level executives at Fortune 500 companies to unlock the path to ultra productivity for them and their teams. Over the last 15 years, Kim has become a true entrepreneur. She continues to be a coach for executives and traders. She's also the host of the Wall Street Coach podcast, and she's written several books, including Discipline and Finding Your Edge, Navigating FOMO, and perhaps most notably, Transforming Wall Street, a conscious path for a new future. You could follow her on Twitter at Ann Curtin. Hello, Kim. Aloha. Happy New Year. And thank you for being here to take the time to speak with me today.
Aloha, Anthony. It's so fun to be with you. And even more fun that we got to meet at the Traders for a Cause conference. So now I feel like very relaxed with you. So I'm very glad we got that chance to hang out in that van, shuttle back and forth to the party, and just get to talk.
Yes, absolutely. It was such a pleasure to get to meet you. And I found that there's such a depth to the conversations that I had with you over the course of that weekend. It's not so much, okay, this trade was frustrating. It's why was something frustrating and what are we experiencing sort of under the hood?
Yep, yep. I love that topic because I'm fascinated by it. And so it's a topic, and I love talking to all kinds of people about it because everybody has a perspective that just expands my perspective, which is what I think life is about. It's about expansion and about learning and understanding all the different perspectives there are to step into. And that just, I think, enriches my life. I can definitely say that.
And I can definitely attest to that. The conversations that I had with you were extremely enriching for me. So thank you for that. Um, if it's okay with you, Kim, I would love to just ask how you found your path into coaching.
Hmm. Yeah, I found it through hiring a coach myself. I was working at one of the world's largest hedge funds, and I was definitely satisfied monetarily. I was being very well compensated. I definitely felt a lot of my strengths were being utilized. I'm a very strategic and can, juggle many balls at once. So all of that got utilized in that position. But there was just this gnawing inside that it really wasn't what I was born to do. It wasn't my bliss, as the mythologist Joe Campbell talks about. But I really didn't know what the bliss was. And I wound up doing a personal development course, and that coincided with a high ropes course in the forest up in Iverton, Connecticut, where I met my first coach. She was an executive coach. She also did life coaching. And, you know, I don't think I could say I'm terrified of heights, but I'm definitely not a fan of climbing up high into a tree and then taking a tightrope across to another tree. Like that was just not, and I signed up without realizing that that's what this course was. So I found myself like, what have I got myself into? And I remember this coach was so incredibly successful at holding this space for me. I remember, climbing to the top of this tree, God knows how many feet off the ground we were, looking way down at her. And there was a look in her eyes of, you can do it, and a look in her eyes of, but if you can't, I won't make you feel ashamed. And it was this combination of these two places held in tension that I found courage to move forward with it. It was three tight ropes, set up in this forest. So it was a long process. And I remembered that feeling that she gave me. I was like, wow, what would that be like to give that place of choice and empowerment without shame to other people? And in the end, that's what wound up happening. I hired that coach and had a transformative experience almost immediately within my own coaching. And it was then that I really started to feel called to become a coach myself, which, when you work at one of the world's largest hedge funds, and it was an impossible place to get into, I mean, is it a brag? I guess it is a little bit, but it's also a brag of how crazy I was because like you just didn't walk away from that job. And everybody kind of was like, are you kidding? Like it was so hard to get in and now you're going to walk away from it. But I just felt so called to do that work that it really didn't even feel like a hard decision. It was like, I have to move towards that which is calling me.
That's quite profound. This feeling of going from something that you're really scared of and you fear, to breaking down that barrier and sort of going through the threshold and finding this whole other world, maybe a world of comfort. It sort of sounds like you found that's quite a profound experience, especially coming from someone who also has a fear of heights. There's been a lot of stuff I haven't done because heights were involved.
And I even felt a little bit like a fraud on that high ropes course because there was one girl in the course who literally was so afraid of heights she wouldn't drive across bridges. Living in New York City, that's kind of tricky. You can't really get out of the city unless you're willing to go over a bridge or two. I guess you go through one tunnel, but that's just to Jersey. You want to go to Long Island, you're going over a bridge or upstate New York, and I remember, like, I wasn't that afraid of heights, but what I realized is as I stood at the bottom of those trees, I was like, I don't want to go up there. So that told me I did have a fear, and but I think what I want to say is that entire experience, God knows how long it lasted. It felt like days. I was up in those trees because everybody watched and supported each person walk those 3 tightropes, and I remember that the fear stayed the entire time. But what was fascinating for me to see is that one can be in fear, one can be afraid, and still find a way to navigate through, especially when you have encouragement, especially when you have other people rooting you on.
Absolutely. And having had the honor and privilege of being a part of one of your coaching sessions, I can absolutely, say that that sort of feeling of being nervous about something and going through and feeling like the person that is coaching you understands and is listening, non-judgmental, and is assisting, and you come out the other side feeling better, feeling great about it. I definitely feel like that experience you had, with heights and the tightrope is very similar to the experience I had in your coaching session, and so incredibly grateful for it. And I'm sure the other individuals, who have been a part of coaching with you would say the same thing. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a room filled with, it was all men at that event. And I just was so impressed with how, trepidatious a lot of people were there that day. And yet the courage that was shown and the willingness to be forthright about the different challenges other traders had, it really moved me emotionally to see the brotherhood, to see how supportive instantly the other 15 men in the room were to that one person who would speak or share their story. And I think it just lends itself to perhaps making everybody see, like, none of us are alone in the struggles we have. None of us are, we have a tendency to think I must be the only one who struggles with XYZ. And in those kind of forums, I think it becomes apparent, no, everybody is struggling with their own internal dragons or demons. And it isn't about isolation. Our culture kind of has this predisposition towards this isolation, making us all feel so isolated. And unfortunately, not to demonize social media, but it does have a tendency to make us feel like, wow, they all have it together. I don't. And it's misinformation. It's misinformation.
Yeah, yeah. I was also struck by just how open and supportive everybody in that particular session was, and I think also it helps to have an awesome coach facilitating that discussion as well.
Thank you. You're kind. You're kind. I love what I do, and I do believe that because I have been coached, that facilitates, if I am a good coach, it's because I know what it's like to be coached. I understand how much courage it asks of a person to step into that arena and be vulnerable and be willing to face hard truths about themselves or about the way they're operating. So I feel, I have a team of coaches that work with me, and those coaches that are on my team, when I'm hiring them, one of the things that I actually always make sure that they have experienced is their own coaching, and that they too have been with difficult, hard truths about themselves. Because yes, it's great and appropriate to have certifications and to formally be trained as a coach, which is absolutely important, but it's not, in my opinion, as important as a willingness to be with your own dragons. And if you have been willing to go to the dark, deep basement within yourself, then I feel you are in a position to accompany somebody else, perhaps where they need to go.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that sort of speaks to the question I was going to ask you, which is, what is your approach to coaching, and how would you even define coaching?
Yeah. Coaching is very different than therapy. I have been a participant in both. I actually asked for my first therapist when I was about 10 years old because of the household I was growing up in. I kind of got, the memo early that I probably needed some tools to navigate that environment, two different environments I was constantly in. And I am not somebody who diminishes therapy at all. But for me personally, I found coaching to be quicker, uh, more coming from a standpoint of treating me naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. And that is the kind of the foundation my coach training is built upon. CTI is the Coaches Training Institute, which is the curriculum I went through in addition to others. But that particular platform teaches coaches to hold clients naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. And what that really means is that you don't receive people, most of all yourself, as broken. That if you show up in the world in ways that are costly, what that indicates to you is that you probably had that way of operating serve you once in your life, and now no longer does it serve you. Now perhaps it costs you. And so for me, when I first began to experience my own coaching, I felt the paradigm shift of that. Whereas in my experience with therapy, I did feel sort of like I was broken. I did feel as if I needed to be fixed. But the way that the coach held me when I started to have coaching was radically different. It was an experience of feeling not broken, but like, oh, these are coping mechanisms that did serve me once, but now are no longer valuable. And so it was, I think, because the concept of shame isn't present in coaching. There feels like a neutral place for you to put all your baggage out on the table. It's not as uncomfortable to speak to the places where you perhaps are not showing up as your whole self. And that, I think, is part of the power of why, in my experience, coaching is way more effective than therapy.
That's a really interesting distinction between therapy and coaching. I think maybe some people might have the wrong impression and definition to begin with of coaching, where it might be their assumption is that it's a broken trader or someone who's not doing well,
Right, right.
versus coaching. If you are a successful trader looking to get to the next level, coaching could very much be for you. In fact, maybe that would be what is recommended to a profitable trader.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and I can only speak for myself. I was at the top of my game when I hired a coach. I had a very lucrative position. I had a gorgeous apartment. Like my life from the outside looking in was pretty amazing. But it was that hunger for more that really drove me to coaching. I wanted to have that sense of inner I wanted to have that sense of inner peace, but ultimately a sense of equanimity. I wanted to be the contribution I felt I was really called to be, so to speak. I knew I was a contribution to my boss and to my coworkers, but I was like, no, I'm here to be a contribution in a bigger way. And I wanted to find out what that was. So coaching truly was me. One of the things too I learned early on about coaching is that it's really about practicing curiosity. It's really about learning how to live. One of the homework assignments in my coach training is to go to improv school, because what they wanted us to learn was the practice of yes and I that was a new practice for me. And so what I found in the coach training and in my own personal coaching was it just opened up the vistas of how I was living my life, how I was working in my life, how I responded to perhaps past experiences in my childhood. It was like, ooh, it just gave me so much more fluidity and flexibility and empowerment that I was like, ooh, this is very effective, because you're coming from this place of creativity, neutrality, and yes, and it's truly living in possibility every moment, every day.
I love that concept of yes and, opposed to period or exclamation mark or question
Yeah,
mark. And
either or. It's got to be black or white, yes or no, right or wrong. It's like we're missing this Grand Canyon of other things uh, that are available to us. And it even helps us with how we judge ourselves, because that judgment is so heightened all the time. And it's like, well, what if you're right and you're wrong? That opens up the doors to like, maybe I keep some of how I show up while tapering back these places that seem to cost me. It's like, I don't even like right or wrong because they're so binary. I really like to live in that place of the yes and I actually have a necklace that says the word yes. And when I've worn it, friends will tease me and they'll be like, "But what if you have to say no, Kim?" And I said, "Well, then I'll say yes to no." It gives you so much more flexibility when you live from that yes. And that's what so much of the training I've gone through has taught me. And, hopefully I succeeded teaching that a little bit to the clients I work with.
that's extremely powerful. And to your last point, one of my questions was, what are some of the goals or maybe even problems and solutions that you've helped traders go through? I'm generally speaking,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah. It varies. I think each client comes with their own perspective, their own life history, their own challenges. Of course, I think for the most part, I'm, going to see things that traders always go through, which are things like fear of missing out, how to not let greed get the best of somebody, how to take time off and not feel like, they're guilty taking time off, or they're missing that, elusive perfect trade they've been waiting on for ever and a day. I think those are standard issues that come up. Confidence, or how to navigate too much confidence, the concept of hubris, or just how to handle when there's a big win or there's a big loss, and how to operate on the other side of that, because both of them have physiological consequences when you have a big win, when you have a big loss. And so, and also just balancing the harmony between working, having so much screen time, and trying to create a life that it's all in service to, right? It's easy to just stay in the work mode, and to step into living the life, remembering that all of that is in service to your life. I think sometimes it's tricky. That sense of like, it is the ladder that begins to change your life and opens up doors and possibilities, perhaps for you to financially be a contribution in ways you never expected to be. But with it, if you're not careful, it can become, kind of the ruler of you, instead of you being the ruler of it, you being the director of it. It can direct you. So that too is sometimes addressed.
Okay, yeah, and absolutely, those are all issues that traders definitely have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, and last for a long time. So,
And they're gremlins. I mean, there's nobody, trader or executive or investor or just, stay-at-home dad, who doesn't have to wrestle with their internal saboteurs, internal, inner critics. And those, for the most part, across the board, are way, way, getting way too much airtime in most people's heads. And it shuts down opportunities. It shuts down possibility. And that is really, you want to talk about a loss, like that's a loss that compounds over years when you have an inner saboteur telling you misinformation. It can just sabotage and be a leak in your gas tank day in and day out, with not just trading, but relationships, finances, so many things. And the last thing is also relationship to money. A lot of traders, find themselves with great wealth unexpectedly, and yet they have an internal temperature set for a very different amount. And that can lead to self-sabotage unconsciously, that, or feeling like they're not part of their tribe anymore. And if you don't do that work around your relationship to money, as soon as you begin, you will find that there is a cost later on. And also the opposite side of unconsciously sabotaging, you could be caught up in thinking that your P&L is your worth, is your self-esteem. And that's going to also sabotage you in different ways. So, yeah.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. All things traders deal with, and in terms of how you approach this from a coaching perspective, how much is tailored to the individual that you're working with, and how much of it, is sort of generally applicable? Do you have to make
Yeah.
a new coaching program for every single person?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say, yes, every coaching is very personalized to the person coming into coaching. However, there are some basic foundations that probably do repeatedly show up for every client. And those are what I call my 5 practices. And those 5 practices I speak about at length in my book, Transforming Wall Street. Those practices seem to be practices that, when applied, in somebody's work, trading, life seem to facilitate shifts in probably all the things I just mentioned are the potential challenges of clients. Self-responsibility is the first practice, which is being willing to take ownership as being the cause in the matter of one's life. Self and other empathy for people to actually create change in their life. They're certainly going to have to learn how to give themselves some empathy, some compassion. Practice 3 is being able to be with emotions. I call it emotional non-resistance, which is learning how to serve hard to be with feelings instead of stuffing them down, instead of ignoring them. Those 3 are pretty critical in any coaching engagement. Practice 4 is what I call embracing your hero's journey. I am heavily influenced by Campbell's work, that mythologist I mentioned earlier, and he talked about each of us are on a heroic path, and that hero's journey, when you start to see yourself as the hero of your own story, you also have a shift in consciousness. Instead of seeing yourself as a victim of life, you start to realize, wait a minute, I'm actually the person who can shift how I look at the challenges I've had and see myself as the hero of this life of mine. And that's what's so, I think, so empowering for people. And then the 5th practice is mindfulness, learning how to be still, learning how to be present to now, as opposed to fixated on the past, fixated on the future.
Yeah, and these 5 practices I found in your book to be extremely important and useful. I love how in your book you actually have, like, they're broken down by interview, and every practice has very applicable examples from individuals who are showing in their daily life whether they're part of, the masters of the universe, the Wall Street 50, or the the leaders of consciousness. They show just like great examples, illustrations of just how applicable these practices are. So I highly recommend everybody, if they haven't already read your book, Transforming Wall Street, to go and do that. I think there's something for everybody in that book,
Thank
traders
you.
and non-traders.
Thank you so much, Anthony, for saying that. It was a magical moment because, when I interviewed these people, I didn't really have a format of what the book was going to look like. I had a sense of what I wanted to speak to. But when I had finished the interviews and I was reading all of their stories, at some, I was really struggling. I had writer's block. I was like, who am I to write this book? I also had a house sitting opportunity in Hawaii, which is how I even came to Hawaii in the first place. So I had, luckily I had 8 months at this house sitting gig and this big tiny room table. But I was like, I don't know how to get this book written. Like, I was definitely stuck. And then by the grace of God, one day, for the 50th time, I'm reading all of these people's interviews. At some point, it dawned on me, and I was like, wait a minute, did they all follow those 5 practices? And then sure enough, every single one of those 50 practiced one or more of those 5 practices. Maybe they didn't call it what I called it, but I saw them exemplifying what that practice represented. That was a pretty special moment for me. I'll never forget it because I was like, oh my God, I think I have the format of the book now. So pretty magical.
Yeah, there are times when I'm reading it and I sort of get lost in who you're interviewing, and I can't remember whether they're managing a portfolio for a living or if they're a shaman. and
Exactly.
and
Isn't that great though? Isn't it great that like we get to finally get lost not in what somebody does, but how they live? Like I love that. I love that because that's what turns me on with people. Like I have had deep conversations with people who have no home, who live on the streets of New York City. And I've had, superficial conversations with people who might be geniuses. Like I am about like the conversation and the heart of somebody's life. there's plenty of geniuses who don't give me superficial conversations, but it's just about seeing past the trappings of titles or bank accounts or education. It's about seeing like the heart of somebody. And another person I just want to speak to there is, I don't know if you've ever seen that interview with Shlomo, the guy who was a brain surgeon who gave it all up to just rollerblade Santa Monica boardwalk day in and day out. But it's such an inspiring conversation because you hear like, most of the people who see him on that boardwalk don't realize this man was a brain surgeon, right? But he chose to live a different kind of life. So that just turned me on. And I am so glad you noticed that in the book, that, you were losing track. Is it a shaman, a monk, or is it a Bill Ackman? Like,
Right.
who is this talking? I don't even know.
Yeah.
I don't even care.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also love, you bring up this. It's not, I wouldn't say a challenge to the readers, but something for them to think about, which is, conscious capitalism, and this idea of, sure, you can be a capitalist, but you can also possibly be, conscious. And if you use your financial resources, use your resources uh, to help others. And it's just kind of fitting that that was sort of in the spirit of what Traders for a Cause is. And I found reading the book, there are elements where these pieces all started to connect for me. One of the questions I have for you is, for those who may be skeptics and think that the idea of conscious capitalism is an oxymoron, or it's too much of a paradox, what would your response be to those people?
I would say you haven't read Adam Smith. And unfortunately, a lot of people who speak about Adam Smith, and one of his famous books is The Wealth of Nations, a lot of what I've found over the years was that most people heard about Adam Smith from a professor, maybe read a couple of selected quotes, but because of the research I wanted to do for this book, I did read the umbrella called The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which is where The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith actually sits underneath. And Adam Smith was actually a moral philosopher. Not only was he schooled at Glasgow University, but he also was a teacher there. And what he actually says is that the wealth of a nation can be judged not just on what business is succeeding at, but what all people of a nation are living, what all people are experiencing. And that to me was shocking. I mean, when I was reading The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which it's a dry read, let me warn you, it's a repetitive old English kind of, style. But I just thought, well, I must be misunderstanding something, because my friends who have more degrees than me have told me Adam Smith is an advocate of pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but that's not the man that I'm reading. So I called Glasgow University and asked to speak to the world's most famous expert on Adam Smith, to just find out, like, what am I missing? How am I not seeing what it seems like every professor at business school is advocating about him? And that professor was like, well, none of them read Adam Smith. Kim, you actually did. And what you're seeing is correct. This man would not, by today's standards, ever self-identify as a capitalist. If anything, he would identify as a conscious capitalist. And so what I would say, though, is just think about it from a business perspective. If you treat your own people who work for you in a business well, do you think you're going to get more out of them than if you treat your own people, including your customers, like crap? Like, the people that are treated like crap don't have a tendency to give. They don't have a tendency to bring all of their best selves forward. And so to me, it's really not rocket science. It's just common sense. Treat people with respect, treat people like you want to be treated, and you will probably have them contribute back to you in ways unrealized. And that to me, when one of the other people I interviewed in my book, Lynn Stout, she wrote an amazing book called The Myth of Shareholder Value, the Shareholder Value Myth is her book. And she talks at length that business really operated this way prior to the past 30 years. It's only been in the last 30 years that business has gotten kind of all jacked up. And this was due to a lot of misinformation about Milton Friedman, as an economist, not an attorney, misread the mandate in the corporate structure and identified the companies had to be run by their shareholders. But prior to that mistake he made 30 years ago, business was never run this way. So many of the problems I see in our culture, in business, in capitalism today, is because of that misinformation. And that's what Lynn Stout talks about at length in her book. And lucky for me, she let me interview her for mine. But I just say to people, just go back to common sense, like a lemonade stand. If you make crap lemonade and sell it for a high price, how many customers are you going to have? If you yell at the customer and say you ugly and then give them their lemonade, are they going to come back to you? And yet so much of our business today, you think about the way we're treated when it comes to insurance companies, when it comes to big banks, we're not treated like important customers to them. And that leaves a bad taste in the consumer's mouth. So to me, it doesn't have to be complex. Just, go back to the basics. I think most people know you get more with honey than you do with, when people feel when a company is looking out for their best interest and when they're not, you just know it.
Mhm.
You just know it.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's a couple points there. One is about the relationship between the consumer and a business owner in the trading world. I was doing an interview with someone who had mentioned the way that their broker and a particular platform sort of treated them. They needed particular information from the broker, and the broker was just kind of gave them a boilerplate answer. This is what you get. Thanks. And this person was really dissatisfied because they were thinking about how much money they spend every month, and the broker wasn't treating them well, wasn't taking care of them, seemed to not care about that amount of money and just sort of skipped over them. And it was very clear the amount of frustration and discomfort in sort of that relationship. And the other thing that I think your book, is really, really a great example, particularly for traders, is that how you mentioned, whether it's, Ayn Rand or it's, another economist, take your pick, rather than relying on others to give you the cliff notes and the assessment for what those individuals had to say, maybe go and read those original sources for oneself. And in the world of trading, whether it's, from Nate, I know Nate does a good job, excellent job on telling people, go back and watch the trades, go back and watch the tape, trying to get people to put in the work and do things for themselves so that they could be self-sufficient and have a better understanding of the market and what's going on. Your book seems to do, you have very similar advice, and I really appreciated that from a trader standpoint, and yes, also from a standpoint of wanting to correct misinformation that might be out there about an individual. Go do the work for yourself, whether that's reading through filing sheets or the whether the technical analysis or the fundamentals of a company, and come up with your own conclusion instead of just read what you see on Twitter and take that.
Yeah. And it appears, I wanted to say it's harder, it's more work, right? But yet I want to take that back, because in a sense, it isn't more hard. It's more hard to be misinformed and have to course correct later. It's actually better to do your own due diligence, because then that sense of self-reliance happens, where you realize, like, that was a really moment. That was an important moment for me on this journey of this book, because I had so much imposter syndrome myself. Who did I think I was? And part of the reason I had to read Adam Smith myself was because I had not gotten a business degree or an MBA. I was not steeped in academia. I went to the Fashion Institute of Technology, FIT, a creative school, a brilliant genius school. Calvin Klein went there, Norma Kamali, like all these famous designers, but that was not steeped in heavy, rigorous academia. And so I didn't have this background, and I wanted to be fully prepared to write my book from a platform of being informed. So that is what forced me to go and read all these, books that probably, if I had gone to academia, I wouldn't have read. I probably, would have had to write all these papers, and I would have taken shortcuts, as anybody who's trying to get through a rigorous college degree does have to do to survive it.
Mm-hmm.
The same for a trader. So at first blush, it may appear that like, oh my God, you want me to go read this stuff myself? Can't I talk to the experts who know better than me? But what if you're going to see something just like I got to see, because I read it through my own interpretation? I didn't have somebody else telling me what to think about it. I got to find out what I thought about it myself. But look, it will feel costly at first because it is time consuming, but I do believe in the end it will save you time in the long run. And also, I think I just want to say this, because of the first major, development course that I did on myself that taught me about self-responsibility, that instilled inside of me this belief that I had to take ownership to be responsible for my life. I couldn't outsource that to experts. And because of a couple of, opportunities that the universe gave me, where I saw people in authoritative positions, judges, attorneys, doctors, not actually be correct, I was really able to see early, wow, just because somebody has a title or an educational degree doesn't mean they necessarily know what's going on here. They actually might be misinformed. They actually might make mistakes. So I think too, I found out perhaps a little earlier than most to not surrender to the authority, to not surrender to those who tell you what to do. It's an easier life when you just listen to what the experts say and do whatever they say. It takes a little more effort and muscle to question things for yourself, do your own research. But that too, I think is pretty important as a trader, especially. You've got to become somebody who questions even those who seemingly have it all figured out, not in an antagonistic way, but in a place of curiosity, because you could see an opportunity or a strategy or an opening nobody else saw. Like, what if that's there because of the life you've lived and the journey you've had that nobody else will see?
Yeah, absolutely. As traders, we're always trying to find our edge and our personality, our risk profile in the market. What strategy do we employ, and why does that strategy fit our personality? So I think being able to dissect things in this way and think about it for oneself gets traders closer to understanding who they are in the market, why they tend to be a short seller, why they tend to go long and are bullish the majority of the time as maybe their bias or their preference in the market. And I think this is all extremely applicable for traders. This idea of going and doing the work for yourself, becoming self-sufficient, and questioning, not in an antagonistic way, but questioning for your own self-sufficiency, even those who are coming from a place of authority.
you know, you don't want to question like, is that really an A or a B or a C? Like, but it's, I think it's just never completely outsourcing the work that you have to do. Like there is going to be an up leveling of your education, and you need to be receptive. I'm going to actually just speak from my coach training, and I think this is perfectly applicable to trading. My coach training and applicable to traders is that in coaching, we each intensive had to practice a certain kind of style of coaching because we were being introduced to multiple styles. And so, you know, each weekend as we developed our repertoire of skills, you know, we would get to weekend 3 and they're like, you can't use week 1 and 2. You can only use 3. And we were like, but that's crazy. 1 or 2 might be better. No, just stick with 3. And the same, you know, it was very rigid throughout. And then we got to the last class, which was called In the Bones. And in that, they said to us, okay, now you can use whatever one of those you want. Because now that you were rigid and structured in how to apply XYZ, you're now in a position to know when to leave it, when to bring it in. And I think that's the same for traders. You have to be rigid in the beginning. You have to have trustworthy mentors. You do have to follow protocol. But then after years of work, after years of screen time, you then have to be practicing from in the bones. When is it appropriate to zig? When is it appropriate to zag? But that takes years of practice.
What would you say to people who are critical of those who have resources that seek coaching? You know,
Yeah.
those people who would say, oh, well, if I had, you know, 6 extra zeros in my bank account, I wouldn't have a worry in the world. Why does this person feel like they need coaching, or they need to see a performance coach, or something like that? What would your response be to those people?
Well, remember that when you have monetary success, while you might be in a position to get all of the wants that you have met, like the want of a fancy car, the want of a fancy watch, the want of penthouses or an exotic lifestyle, that doesn't necessarily mean you're getting your basic needs met. Needs are very different than wants. And that is the huge distinction. I have worked with them and met them, people who have wealth that's beyond your imagination, and yet they don't have peace of mind. They don't have equanimity. They're not happy or joyful. And that, in fact, I think that can be even more painful when you have great wealth. You've sort of believed that when you finally achieved a certain level of financial success, then you would be happy to work hard and get there. And of course, there's those who don't work hard and find themselves there because of maybe they inherited money or just got lucky. But when you get there and you aren't happy, that's a really tricky place to be, because kind of who can you complain to? Who can you bitch to? Who's going to listen to somebody who's like, wow, I have all this money, but I'm still not happy? Who's going to give them empathy? Yet that is the case for many people, because if you have your wants met without those needs, you are ultimately not going to feel satiated. You're not going to feel satisfied and have that inner peace. And we haven't been given, as a people, as a culture, a distinction to understand what our basic needs are. So what's the difference? Well, a want would be, let's say, a Lamborghini. But what would be the need underneath that? Well, maybe respect. Like, all of the things that we want are because underneath them, there's a need driving them. And so a lot of the work that I do with people is to have them start to identify what are the basic needs they do have a desire for, but aren't getting met. And once people are able to start identifying, again with language, right? Language is the bridge to everything. Once you start to look at what those needs are, you have a better chance at securing them. But if you just keep thinking, oh, I just want the car, or I just want, the Twitter follower count, and you don't look beneath what's really operating underneath it all, then even when you secure that goal, you're going to see there's another goal that just keeps pulling you up, 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 and that sense of never feeling satisfied is going to be afoot. But understanding that respect is a human need, understanding community is a human need, understanding freedom is a human need. There's a whole list, and of course, people can reach out to me if they want that list. That list, once you start to integrate it, then you can start to make requests, not only of yourself, but those around you, to get those needs met. And that's when you're going to find yourself really having true joy, true happiness, true peace of mind. And the good news is that can happen at any level of the financial stratosphere. You can be somebody, if you've ever listened to Eckhart Tolle, he talks about the fact that when he had this sense of consciousness and awakeness like happen for him, he was living on a park bench. He didn't have a home. He didn't have any money at the time. And yet, through that process of his own self-awareness, he felt he had everything. And that, maybe is going to be elusive, let's say, for the majority of us. But what would it, I am not experiencing the level of success for my business as I had hoped after 15 years. It's been a higher climb, a harder climb than I expected. But most days I'm pretty happy. Why? Because I'm getting my needs met. Maybe I'm not getting all my wants. I don't have that fancy car that I want to have, which is a Maserati, by the way. But I get to have contribution met, freedom met, community met, like respect. Like I'm getting so many of my basic needs met every single day that, yeah, it'd be fun to have a convertible Maserati, but I am happy even if I never get that, because those basic needs of mine are being met, not every single day in every single way, but the most important ones, the most non-negotiable ones for me are being met. And when they aren't, then I start to feel depressed, angry, sad, apathetic, frustrated. But because I've done this work for so long, those light up for me. Those are lights on my dashboard that I'm like, I'm feeling really depressed. I'm feeling anxious. I am not getting my needs met. Just like when my lights come on my dashboard of my car, I have to get gas. I have to get oil. I have to get windshield wiper fluid or whatever the hell it's lighting up for. Be conscious of what those flags are, because that can turn you on to be like, oh, wait a minute, I have to stop going down this path because these things have not been taken care of.
Thank you. That's extremely powerful. And it makes me think back to your talk that you gave at Traders for a Cause on a very similar topic of our wants versus our needs, and how that can really have an impact on traders.
It was so incredibly interactive. I was so happy that so many people in the audience like raise their hands and ask such really great questions. So, I hope I do a good job at that talk, everybody, but watch it, because the traders who ask questions in the audience like made that conversation even richer.
One of the questions I had was about, the importance of emotional intelligence for traders. How important is emotional intelligence for traders to have, and how often should traders check in with themselves,
Yeah.
And think about emotional intelligence?
I think it's the foundation that everything else is built upon. I mean, I think we need to check in all the time on where we are as human beings, where we are as emotional beings. Like, no matter how left brain or kind of pragmatic a person may think of themselves, I hate to break it to you, but you are driven by your emotions. We are human beings. We are not robots. Even if you are really well practiced at disconnecting yourself from your feelings, I promise you, they are still driving you and the decisions you make. So part of my advocacy is just begin to notice what is happening internally for you. Every day you sit down at your trading desk, pause for just a moment and take a look, do a full scan of your head, your heart, your body, your arms. Are you coming from a disagreement with your significant other? Did you just have a blow up with like one of your kids? Is a parent sick that you're spending time worrying about or trying to help take care of them? All of these things are informing your way of showing up that day, are informing how you will see your screens that day. If you're not present to it, if you're not conscious to it, how can that not be potentially, you know, clouding the view that you see all day? But if you're aware, just as simple as, let's say, uh, oh, I didn't get enough sleep last night. Well, that alone helps perhaps take the edge off of why there's a dragginess to you that day. Maybe if there's enough challenge that you're in the midst of, you're going to have to ask yourself, is today the best day to trade? Is it better that I just sleep in a little longer? Is it better for me to perhaps take a walk outside to just try to discharge it or journal it out or call a good friend who's not going to try to fix it and just bitch it out and complain and get it off your chest? I've just recently read a book by Brad Stulberg, whose book is called The Practice of Groundedness, which is just a phenomenal book. And he gives us scientific studies that reference if you take a 5-minute walk after 90 minutes of work, you will see exponential benefits to your body and to your mind and to your cognitive ability. So that sense of being in tune to your emotions as a trader, to me, if you're not in tune to them, I'm promising you, they are in tune to you and they are impacting you and affecting you. Just like any athlete is going to find that there's days they're on and days they're off. You still might have to play in the game, but if you at least are cognitively aware that you might be compromised in some way, then you potentially can put in boundaries and protections or stops for yourself to navigate appropriately under your compromised condition.
That's a great point. I know there's traders who recommend pre-market, before the market even opens, sort of writing down or having sort of an assessment, some way so that at the end of the day they have had a record of how they were feeling before they were trading and how they feel at the end of the day. So it makes absolute sense.
We have one too, actually, tradercheckin.com. Go to tradercheckin.com and you can download for free an assessment that takes you through those questions for you to at least get clear on, just like on a subway map, right? Or any map, it says you are here. Like, where is that today when I'm about to sit down? Where is that here? Am I distracted? Am I upset? Am I happy? Am I in neutrality? Like, ultimately, you want to be trading from neutrality. It's going to be hard for you to find that place all the time. But if you at least are conscious that you're not neutral, that you're angry that day, maybe that's the day you're going to revenge trade. Wouldn't it be better to know before money's on the line? I'm really pissed about who won the election, or I'm really pissed that I couldn't get my coffee, before the line showed up. Like, all of that is going to inform everything you see that day. Wouldn't you be better knowing what's potentially going to be operating within you?
Who would you say coaching is for, and who would you say coaching may not be for?
I would say probably coaching won't work for those who aren't coachable. And what does coachable mean? It means somebody who's probably willing to take responsibility for where they are in their life. That, let me clarify, doesn't mean blame. It doesn't mean if you find yourself with certain challenges or experiences you've gone through that you had no control over, it doesn't mean that that's your fault. But if you don't take responsibility for what is so and how you're going to respond to what is so, then you're never going to be able to move into a different realm. And so it's infrequent, lucky for me and for my team, infrequent that we have somebody call us for coaching that isn't coachable, but it does happen. And through just a handful of questions, I'm able to tell. In fact, when I first began coaching 15 years ago, not long into a particular client's coaching, I actually, said, this is not for you. You're not in a place where you're going to really be able to apply this concept of self-responsibility. I probably didn't use that term with them, but I actually recommended they do a couple of personal development courses where I knew that sense of self-responsibility would be accentuated. And they weren't happy with me at the time. It was very hard for me to do that because I cared about them, but I just felt it was not going to serve them. They were paying good money, and I didn't feel they were going to be able to apply what we were really in the midst of. And lucky for me, you don't always get to have this, but like 5 years later, they came back and were like, wow, that was such a hard truth at the time, but it kind of was like a cold glass of water in my face that I wasn't taking that sense of self-responsibility. And they were able to make those shifts finally. So that's part of coaching too, right? A willingness to speak the hard truths to people. That's not the most enjoyable part of coaching, but that's what's unique about coaching too, perhaps. And a distinction between that and therapy is I consider what my clients come to coaching with. They tell me what their agenda is. I hold them to their own agenda. In therapy, the concept of therapy itself is that the agenda is kind of set or dictated by whatever that challenges the person's bringing to the table. The experts that be, or the medical experts that be, like, this is what somebody should be coming out with. In the coaching that I was taught is that we let the client set the agenda. I'm there to hold them accountable to that agenda that they create. So I truly am neutral in the experience. And I think that is what makes it empowering as well. That means, when you're having to climb through under barbed wire in wet mud when it's raining and you're in pain, I'm going to be like, if you said you want to get to that finish line, by God, we're getting there. It's hard, but you're getting there. And that you can't get from friends or loved ones because they worry about you. It doesn't mean I don't care about them, but I'm like, I want them to get to their goal, come hell or high water. And if that's what they ask me to do for them, then I'm going to do that for them. And that too, I think, is a big part of those who find success in coaching, the ones who are willing to do, that kind of hard work and go down into the places that probably are messy and swampy, to not be unconsciously informed by them anymore. So yeah, I think it's possible for everybody, but I would say people who haven't really conceptualized taking full ownership, they probably would struggle with coaching. It probably, there would be other things perhaps they could do before they come into that. It's a big investment, and it's going to ask some effort of you. It's like, the red and blue pill, Morpheus gives to Neo at the beginning. Like, you can go back to not seeing, or you can actually really start to see what's so. And, we all see that movie and we're all so impressed that he takes the pill he takes, but it's easy sometimes to just not want to see, you know? You don't want to have to see all the time. It can be tiring. Having done a lot of personal development work on myself, I can promise you there are days where I'm just like, how much do I have to see?
Yeah. And and sort of coupled with being able to take personal responsibility, it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like it's also important that someone keep an open mind.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Keep an open mind, but probably more than anything, I think what stops people from coming into coaching is the fear that they're going to be made to feel wrong, that they're going to feel shame, that they're going to, go, oh, I don't want to look at that because I don't feel shitty about myself. That probably stops more people than not coming into coaching. And that's probably their inner critic who always makes them wrong, no matter what. And to those people, I want to say, one of my spiritual teachers and coaches, he gave me such a great phrase once because I was really struggling with not wanting to be with something that was really going to be hard for me to look at. And he said, sometimes, Kim, that dragon we're afraid to look at turns out to just be a gerbil in drag.
I love that. That's great.
So sometimes, truly, like, is it Roosevelt who said, like, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. It usually isn't as bad or as painful or as difficult as we make it out to be.
How would you define what a good coach is? What does it take to be a good coach?
Yeah. Again, I think it's a coach that has done the work on themselves, a coach who perhaps has had to wrestle with their own dragons, and who is committed to probably their own self-development. If we're 6 feet above ground, I think we all have work to do on ourselves. So a coach that's committed to consciousness, a coach that's committed to self-awareness for themselves, are probably the best facilitators on the journey of your own self-awareness, those who strive to be as self-aware as they can be.
And are there certain coaching types and styles that are better suited for different individuals?
It's a great question. I imagine there are. I do think that I have a kind of unique style, and I imagine there's probably some that I'm not a match for. And if I meet somebody and we have a conversation, and I suspect that, let's say, they are just interested in, let's say, outcome ABC, and they don't want to self-reflect, and they don't kind of want to look at under the hood, I probably would not be the coach for them. So there are some coaches out there who will just kind of approach things in a very, let's say, logical, like, well, 1 + 1 = 2. I don't know if that would be the best coaching experience for anybody, but I do think there's like different styles. I would say go with the coach that feels in your belly like the match for you, because ultimately it's an intimate, deep relationship. You want to feel comfortable with them and that you can be fully transparent with them for you to get the most out of it, that you trust them. Those would be the qualities I'd look for.
Well, thank you so much, Kim, for clarifying all of this about coaching. I think it's absolutely fascinating. If it's okay with you, I would love to ask a lightning round set of questions, just quick questions, quick answers, if that's okay. What advice would you give to a trader who is experiencing imposter syndrome?
I would say perhaps start with just reading that book, Taming Your Gremlin, by Rick Carson. He speaks at length about how imposter syndrome usually is an inner saboteur that's telling you you're not enough. The culture tells us that all the time. Men and women, we're both up against a litmus test that, Madison Avenue is sold to us hook, line, and sinker, that, we're not thin enough, pretty enough, smart enough, buff enough, jacked up enough, blah, blah, blah. And so a lot of people, even those who are, I won't even say who this person was, this man who's famous in the trading world, he posted on Instagram that he has never felt that he was good looking. Now, I have to tell you, this guy is drop dead gorgeous. Like, again, right? Everybody has their own interpretation of beauty. But to read that, a guy that to me has movie star good looks, he was letting us see that on the inside, he doesn't see himself that way. He, in fact, feels insecure about how he looks. That was shocking to me because I thought, oh, this guy knows how good looking he is. But there's evidence of like so many times that he has imposter syndrome that he can't even see. I mean, he has classical good looks, like, and yet he doesn't see that. So if you have imposter syndrome, get really curious about what the statements internally are that you are listening to, unquestioning. You're not even questioning them. Taming Your Gremlin is a great book. And maybe the other thing that I'll point people towards, which is a movie I recommend a lot in my coaching, is The King's Speech. It's a great movie. It's a fictionalized version of a true story of the stutter that the King of England had back in the day. And he works with a speech therapist or a speech expert, but ultimately what you see is him being coached to get comfortable in his own skin because he too struggles with imposter syndrome. It's a great movie to just help one see how imposter syndrome operates and usually comes from our childhood because of factors that, we didn't have control over.
What would you say is the biggest misconception about coaching?
That it can be a hell of a lot of fun. Most people don't think it's going to be any fun at all. But I have to say, almost always my sessions, like my clients, like we will laugh because keeping a sense of humor and fanning the flames of your sense of humor, not taking yourself too seriously is like, helium. It just lifts you up. It lifts your spirit. It lifts your voice. So maybe the most misunderstood piece is that it can be a hell of a lot of fun. It may be some effort, but it definitely can be fun and can give you just a sense of relief.
And if you could give one recommendation for someone to optimize their routine, their mindset, or their lifestyle, what would you tell them?
I would say the most important thing is to get really clear on that inner voice that's telling you you're not enough. That to me is probably the foundational piece. If you are coming from this place of listening to inner saboteurs or negative self-talk all the time, it's just the cost is just beyond what you could ever imagine. Do that work first. Find out what is that self-talk. There's a beautiful quote recently that I came across. I think it's a Stoic philosopher. I can't remember his name, but he basically said, what has happened for me over this year, I have become my own best friend. The richest relationship that I'll always have is the one with yourself, because you'll be with yourself till your deathbed. And when those friends don't show up, if you can count on yourself to really be your own friend, there's just nothing you cannot do.
That's excellent. And do coaches need coaching?
Absolutely. Is it okay to curse? I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Yes, and yes. And if their coach doesn't engage in coaching, I wouldn't work with them. I have had my accountant every, year for 15 years say to me, Kim, you spend so much money on personal development. What the hell? So, yes, I mean, does somebody have to always be plugged into coaching? No, because it's times after you work with a coach where you need to digest it and integrate it and live it and practice it. But, personally, I've had an unusual life. So I had a lot to unpack from. I had a lot of the onion layers to unwind myself from. So I also do personal development work beyond coaching. I have had spiritual teachers. I've done shamanistic training. I have had other ways to sort of make sure that I am opening myself up to even more possibility. So the short answer, which, I have not given you for one of your questions, Anthony, is yes. I think it's important for coaches to have coaches or that sense, because look, at some point, there is a pausing, and even for myself, my accountant asking me that question, like, oh, maybe I'm doing too much personal development. Maybe once in a while I get to just take off, right? So that sense of striving, I have to watch that myself, that I don't take it too far. But I would say, again, just look at, is this because you think something's wrong with you? Or is it because you're hungry for being more awake and aware and conscious? Like, those are two very different motives.
My last question for you, Kim, is for those listening that want to learn more about you, find your book, or get into contact with you, how can they do so?
TheWallStreetCoach.com is our website. You can find everything about me and my team there. And as I spoke to earlier, that tool, TraderCheckIn.com, is, a free download. We do emails every week as well, and we hear from our, people that get them, that they really love them and find valuable. So sign up for our newsletter and perhaps subscribe to my podcast. I don't have as many subscribers as you do, Anthony, but we do strive to put on guests for traders that really speak to the challenges that they face and to help encourage and inspire them. So the Wall Street Coach is our podcast. So maybe sign up there.
And I highly recommend everybody go and listen to the Wall Street Coach podcast. Excellent interviews, tons of insight and depth. So I highly recommend that.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you.
And Kim, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to be here with me and to talk with me. I always enjoy talking with you. I always learn something. It's always a good time. So thank you so much. Mahalo.
Mahalo. Thank you so much for having me on. As we say in Hawaii, a hui ho, until we meet again.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, and notification bell. Thanks for watching.